They thought the stable was the safest place on the plantation, away from the big house, away from the overseer's eye, away from trouble. That's where they were wrong, because the man they trusted with their horses was watching everything. Before dawn, the stables were already awake. Horses shifted in their stalls. Leather creaked. Breath steamed in the cold air. And the slave they barely noticed moved quietly between them, doing what he always did, checking hooves, brushing flanks, tightening straps. To the masters he was invisible. To the horses he was not. They knew his hands. They trusted his voice. They followed his lead without force. That mattered more than anyone understood. He had been born into the stable. Not the fields. Not the house. The stable. From the time he could walk, he learned the language of animals' fear, resistance, submission, panic, and control. Not with shouting, not with violence, with timing. 4 masters owned the plantation. Brothers by blood, partners by profit, each cruel in his own way. One beat slaves publicly to remind them. One punished quietly in places no one visited. One sold children without warning. One enjoyed breaking spirits more than bodies. They disagreed on many things, but they agreed on one. The stable slave was harmless. They were wrong. He saw everything. He heard arguments echo through open windows while saddling horses. He counted which brother rode out angry, which returned drunk. He noticed when dogs were restless for reasons no one explained. He also noticed patterns. When each master rode, which paths they took, how often they traveled alone, and when they never expected resistance. The first death wasn't planned as revenge. It was an accident. At least that's how it looked. A horse spooked on a narrow trail, a sudden rear, a fall onto stone. The master's neck snapped before the body stopped rolling. They blamed the animal. They always blamed the animal. The stable slave said nothing. He fed the horses. He brushed the blood from the saddle. He listened. Fear entered the plantation quietly. The brothers argued. One wanted guards. One wanted punishment. One wanted silence. They chose silence, and silence gave him room. The second master died 2 weeks later. Thrown, trampled, dragged. This time whispers started. Slaves were questioned. Dogs were brought. The stable was searched. Nothing was found, because nothing violent had happened there. Only preparation. By the third death, the brothers stopped riding alone. They traveled in pairs. They carried weapons. They trusted no one, but they still trusted the horses. That was the mistake. On the night the third master died, the stable slave did not sleep. He waited. He listened to hooves return. He heard shouting, then silence, then a scream cut short. By sunrise only one brother remained, and for the first time the plantation realized something terrifying. The stable was quiet, too quiet. They found the horses standing calmly, fed, clean, uninjured, as if nothing had happened. The last master locked himself inside the house. He called for guards. He called for neighbors. He called for God. No one came in time. What happened next would never be written clearly. Accounts conflict. Stories contradict. But one detail never changes. When the final body was found, the stable slave was gone. No blood trail. No horse missing. No direction taken. Just 4 masters dead. And a system that suddenly felt fragile. Because the most brutal revenge did not come from rage. It came from patience. They searched for him at first light. The fields, the quarters, the woods beyond the creek. They found nothing. No torn clothing. No footprints worth following. No horse missing from the stable. It was as if he had dissolved into the morning air. The neighbors arrived late. Too late to help. Too late to understand. They stood over the bodies and argued about what had gone wrong. Some blamed the slaves. Some blamed the horses. Some blamed each other. No one blamed the system. By midday, rumors spread beyond the plantation. 4 masters dead. 1 slave missing. No witnesses. The story twisted with every mile it traveled. By nightfall, the stable slave had become something else. A ghost. A devil. A warning. Slave catchers were hired. Not the careless ones. The experienced kind. Men who tracked humans for a living. They examined the stable carefully. And that's when unease crept in. The horses were calm. Too calm. Animals remember violence. These did not. One catcher noticed something small. Every saddle had been cleaned. Every strap oiled. Every bridle hung with care. This was not chaos. This was control. They followed the trails anyway. Found nothing but broken leads. Scents that ended abruptly. Paths that looped back on themselves. Tracks that vanished near water. The stable slave knew land. Better than them. Weeks passed. The plantation was abandoned. No one wanted it. 4 deaths had poisoned the soil. But the fear didn't stay there. It moved. In nearby counties, strange reports surfaced. Horses slipping reins. Men falling during rides. Masters injured in ways no one could explain. Always accidents. Always animals. Always someone who worked stables nearby, gone by morning. They began to say his name in whispers. Not to summon him. To avoid him. Rewards were posted. First modest. Then desperate. Still no one came forward. Because no one had seen him. Only consequences. One former overseer claimed he survived an encounter. He said a horse suddenly refused him. Reared. Pinned him. And before he blacked out, he heard a voice. Calm. Close. You never learned who really held the reins. The story spread faster after that. Some said it wasn't one man anymore. That the stable slave had become an idea. Others said he was training others. Teaching them what masters never suspected. How to wait. How to choose moments. How to let animals do the work. Years later, a trader swore he saw him far west. Older. Quiet. No chains. No whips. Only horses. No one ever proved it. No grave was found. No capture recorded. Nobody claimed the reward. The official explanation settled on madness. Bad luck, isolated incidents. Because admitting the truth was worse. 4 masters were not trampled by chance. They were studied, outweighted, and erased. And every stable slave who heard the story learned the same lesson. Power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits. And when it moves, it leaves no one to tell the story first. Years passed. The story refused to die. Every time a master fell from a horse, someone remembered. Every time reins snapped, someone whispered. Every time a stable stood too quiet, fear crept back in. Because the pattern never fully stopped. Plantation owners changed routines. They rode less. They rode together. They stopped letting slaves handle horses alone. But fear does strange things. Horses still needed care. Stables still needed hands. And not all lessons were learned. In one county, a master dismissed the rumors, called them slave superstition. He kept a stable slave anyway. Young, quiet, observant. Too familiar. 3 months later, the master broke his leg during a ride. The horse didn't bolt. It simply stopped. Sudden. Refused to move. The fall was blamed on poor footing. But the stable boy vanished that same night. Authorities tried to connect the dots. They failed. No proof. No witnesses. No clear motive. Just absence. The story shifted. It stopped being about revenge. It became about fear changing sides. Masters began asking themselves questions they had never asked before. Who handles my horse? Who saddles it? Who feeds it? Who listens when I talk freely? Control felt thinner. Some slaves stopped seeing the story as myth. They noticed changes. Masters no longer shouted near stables. Overseers avoided certain workers. Punishments became quieter. Not kinder, but careful. In secret, the story became instruction. Not violence. Awareness. Where power truly lived. What systems depended on? What could be disrupted without blood? One preacher warned against it, called it dangerous thinking. But even he lowered his voice near the stable. Decades later, after the war, freedmen told the story differently. Not as horror, as survival. A man who learned the rules so well he never broke them openly. He simply stepped around them. No one knows how many masters fell because of him, or how many learned restraint out of fear. But one truth remains unchanged. The system did not collapse that night, but it cracked, quietly, from the inside. Because the most brutal revenge wasn't violence. It was the realization that power had always been misplaced, and that the ones trusted least had been watching the longest. They never caught him, not in records, not in courtrooms, not in chains, and that haunted them more than any capture ever could. After the war, officials tried to rewrite the past. Plantation deaths were listed as accidents. Slave disappearances were ignored. Stables were renamed. Files were closed. History prefers clean endings. This one refused to be cleaned. Former masters spoke carefully when questioned. They avoided details. They blamed animals. They blamed terrain. They blamed fate. Anything but intelligence. Anything but intention. Among freed black communities, the story lived on. Not loudly. Privately, passed in fragments. A warning. A lesson. A reassurance. That fear was not permanent. That systems could be studied. That silence could be a weapon. Some said the stable slave never meant to kill all four. That the first death forced his hand. Others said every step was measured years in advance. No one agreed, but everyone agreed on this. He was never reckless. He didn't lash out. He didn't run blindly. He waited until the system itself became the tool. Horses remained central to Southern wealth long after slavery, and with them a quiet tension. Who controls what moves you? Who prepares what you trust with your life? Even decades later, trainers notice something odd. Some horses refused certain riders. Not violently, just calmly, as if remembering something older than commands. The stable slave became less a man and more a shadow, a reminder that oppression creates observers, and observers learn. Four masters believed ownership meant safety. They were wrong, because control depends on trust, and trust is fragile. No monument marks what happened. No plaque explains the empty plantation, but the absence itself became the message. Some nights former riders dreamed of hooves, of sudden stillness, of the moment balance disappears, and there's no one to blame but the system they built. The stable slave didn't destroy slavery, but he proved something dangerous, that the people treated as tools were often the ones holding the tools all along, and that realization was enough to haunt them long after the reins fell from their hands.